Hi there, and happy Wednesday. I hope it's been a good day for you so far. I'm Mary Logue. I'm the manager at the Claremont Branch Library, and this is our second to last day reading through The Land of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Yesterday, our friends, we started out with them stuck in the jackdaw's nest, but the sawhorse, the tin woodman, and the gump were able to scare the birds away. But our friends were still stuck in the nest. So the Wogglebug decided to take one of the wishing pills and wish that the gump would be fixed so that he could fly them out of the nest. The wish came true. The gump was restored back with all four of his palm fronds as wings, and our friends got into the contraption they'd made of the gump, and they flew off to Glenda in the south. When they made it to her palace, the Scarecrow told Glenda that General Ginger had overtaken the Emerald City and declared herself queen. Glenda listens to this and responds that in reality, in truth, it should be Ozma, King Pastoria's daughter, who should be ruling the land of Oz and the Emerald City. But Ozma has been missing for years. In order to try and find out more about where the missing Ozma might be, Glenda agrees to go to the Emerald City and question Mombi, who she believes knows where Ozma is. And that is where we pick up our story today. This will be chapter 21, and it is called The Tin Woodman Plucks a Rose. The army of Glenda the Good looked very grand and imposing when it assembled at daybreak before the palace gates. The uniforms of the girl soldiers were pretty and of gay colors, and their silver-tipped spears were bright and glistening, the long shafts being inlaid with mother-of-pearl. All the officers wore sharp, gleaming swords and shields edged with peacock feathers. It really seemed that no foe could possibly defeat such a brilliant army. The sorceress rode in a beautiful palanquin, which was like the body of a coach, having doors and windows with silken curtains. But instead of wheels, which a coach has, the palanquin rested upon two long, horizontal bars, which were borne upon the shoulders of the 12 servants. The Scarecrow and his comrades decided to ride in the gump in order to keep up with the swift march of the army. So, as soon as Glenda had started and her soldiers marched away to the inspiring strains of music played by the royal band, our friends climbed into the sofa and followed. The gump flew along slowly at a point directly over the palanquin in which rode the sorceress. "Be careful," said the Tin Woodman to the Scarecrow, who was leaning far over the side to look at the army below. "You might fall." "It wouldn't matter," remarked the educated Wogglebug. "He can't get broke as long as he's stuffed with money." "Didn't I ask you?" began Tip in a reproachful voice. "You did," said the Wogglebug promptly, "and I beg your pardon. I really will try to restrain myself." "You'd better," declared the boy. "That is, if you wish to travel in our company." "Ah, I couldn't bear to part with you now," murmured the insect feelingly, so Tip let the subject drop. The army moved steadily on, but night had fallen before they came to the walls of the Emerald City. By the dim light of the new moon, however, Glenda's forces silently surrounded the city and pitched their tents of scarlet silk upon the greensward. The tent of the sorceress was larger than the others, and was composed of pure white silk, with scarlet banners flying above it. A tent was also pitched for the Scarecrow's party, and when these preparations had been made with military precision and quickness, the army retired to rest. Great was the amazement of Queen Ginger the next morning, when her soldiers came running to inform her of the vast army surrounding them. She at once climbed to a high tower of the royal palace, and saw banners waving in every direction, and the great white tent of Glenda standing directly before the gates. "We are surely lost," cried Ginger in despair, "for how can our knitting needles avail against the long spears and terrible swords of our foes?" "The best thing we can do," said one of the girls, "is to surrender as quickly as possible, before we get hurt." "Not so," returned Ginger more bravely. The enemy is still outside the walls, so we must try to gain time by engaging them in parley. Go with your flag of truce to Glinda, and ask her why she has dared to invade my dominions, and what are her demands." So the girl passed through the gates, bearing a white flag to show she was on a mission of peace, and came to Glinda's tent. "Tell your queen," said the sorceress to the girl, "that she must deliver up Mombi to be my prisoner. If this is done, I will not molest her further." Now when this message was delivered to the queen, it filled her with dismay, for Mombi was her chief counselor, and Ginger was terribly afraid of the old hag. But she sent for Mombi and told her what Glinda had said. "I see trouble ahead for all of us," muttered the old witch, and glancing into a magic mirror she carried in her pocket. "But we may even yet escape by deceiving this sorceress, clever as she thinks herself." "Don't you think it would be far safer for me to deliver you into her hands?" asked Ginger nervously. "If you do, it will cost you the throne of the Emerald City," answered the witch positively. "But if you will let me have my own way, I can save us both easily." "Then do as you please," replied Ginger, "for it is so aristocratic to be queen that I do not wish to be obliged to return home again to make beds and wash dishes for my mother." So Mombi called Jellia Jam to her and performed a certain magical rite with which she was familiar. As a result of the enchantment, Jellia took on the form and features of Mombi, while the old witch grew to resemble the girl so closely that it seemed anybody could guess the deception. "Now," said old Mombi to the queen, "let your soldiers deliver up this girl to Glinda. She will think she has the real Mombi in her power, and so will return immediately to her own country in the south." Therefore Jellia, hobbling along like an aged woman, was led from the city gates and taken before Glinda. "Here is the person you demanded," said one of the guards, "and our queen now begs you, go away, as you promised, and leave us in peace." "That I will surely do," replied Glinda, much pleased, "if this is really the person she seems to be." "It is certainly old Mombi," said the guard, who believed she was speaking the truth, and then Ginger's soldiers returned within the city gates. The sorceress quickly summoned the Scarecrow and his friends to her tent, and began to question the supposed Mombi about the lost girl Ozma. But Jellia knew nothing at all of this affair, and presently she grew so nervous under the questioning that she gave way and began to weep, to Glinda's great astonishment. "Here is some foolish trickery," said the sorceress, her eyes flashing with anger. "This is not Mombi at all, but some other person who has been made to resemble her. Tell me," she demanded, turning to the trembling girl, "what is your name?" This Jellia dared not tell, having been threatened with death by the witch if she confessed the fraud. But Glinda, sweet and fair though she was, understood magic better than any other person in the land of Oz. So by uttering a few potent words and making a peculiar gesture, she quickly transformed the girl into her proper shape, while at the same time old Mombi, far away in Ginger's palace, suddenly resumed her own crooked form and evil features. "Why, it's Jellia Jam!" cried the Scarecrow, recognizing the girl as one of his old friends. "It's our interpreter," said the Pumpkinhead, smiling pleasantly. Then Jellia was forced to tell the trick of Mombi, and she also begged Glinda's protection, which the sorceress readily granted. But Glinda was now really angry, and sent word to Ginger that the fraud was discovered, and she must deliver up the real Mombi, or suffer terrible consequences. Ginger was prepared for this message, for the witch well understood when her natural form was thrust upon her, that Glinda had discovered her trickery. But the wicked old creature had already thought up a new deception, and had made Ginger promise to carry it out. So the queen said to Glinda's messenger, "Tell your mistress that I cannot find Mombi anywhere, but that Glinda is welcome to enter the city and search for herself for the old woman. She may also bring her friends with her if she likes, but if she does not find Mombi by sundown, the sorceress must promise to go away peaceably and bother us no more." Glinda agreed to these terms, well knowing that Mombi was somewhere within the city walls. So Ginger caused the gates to be thrown open, and Glinda marched in at the head of the company of soldiers, followed by the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, while Jack Pumpkinhead rode astride the Sawhorse, and the educated, highly magnified Wogglebug sauntered behind in a dignified manner. Tip walked by the side of the sorceress, for Glinda had conceived a great liking for the boy. Of course, old Mombi had no intention of being found by Glinda, so when her enemies were marching up the street, the witch transformed herself into a red rose growing upon a bush in the garden of the palace. It was a clever idea, and a trick that Glinda did not suspect, so several precious hours were spent in vain search for Mombi. As sundown approached, the sorceress realized she had been defeated by the superior cunning of the aged witch, so she gave the command to her people to march out of the city and back to their tents. The Scarecrow and his comrades happened to be searching in the garden of the palace just then, and they turned with disappointment to obey Glinda's command. But before they left the garden, the Tin Woodman, who was fond of flowers, chanced to espy a big red rose growing upon a bush. So he plucked the flower and fastened it securely in the tin buttonhole of his tin bosom. As he did this, he fancied he heard a low moan proceed from the rose, but he paid no attention to the sound, and Mombi was thus carried out of the city and into Glinda's camp without anyone having a suspicion that they had succeeded in their quest. Chapter 22. The Transformation of Old Mombi. The witch was at first frightened at finding herself captured by the enemy, but soon she decided that she was exactly as safe in the Tin Woodman's buttonhole as growing upon the bush. For no one knew the rose and Mombi to be one, and now that she was without the gates of the city, her chances of escaping altogether from Glinda were much improved. But there is no hurry, thought Mombi. I will wait a while and enjoy the humiliation of this sorceress when she finds I have outwitted her. So throughout the night the rose lay quietly on the woodman's bosom, and in the morning, when Glinda summoned our friends to a consultation, Nick Chopper carried his pretty flower with him to the white silk tent. For some reason, said Glinda, we have failed to find this cunning old Mombi, so I fear our expedition will prove a failure. And for that I am sorry, because without our assistance little Ozma will never be rescued and restored to her rightful position as Queen of the Emerald City. Do not let us give up so easily, said the Pumpkinhead. Let us do something else. Something else must really be done, replied Glinda with a smile. Yet I cannot understand how I have been defeated so easily by an old witch who knows far less of magic than I do of myself. While we are on the ground, I believe it would be wise for us to conquer the Emerald City for the Princess Ozma and find the girl afterward, said the Scarecrow. And while the girl remains hidden, I will gladly rule in her place, for I understand the business of ruling much better than Ginger does. But I have promised not to molest Ginger, objected Glinda. Suppose you all return to me to my kingdom, or empire rather, said the Tin Woodman, politely including the entire party in a royal wave of his arm. It will give me the greatest pleasure to entertain you in my castle, where there is room enough to spare, and if any of you wish to be nickel-plated, my valet will do it free of expense to all. While the Woodman was speaking, Glinda's eyes had been noting the rose in his buttonhole, and now she imagined she saw the big red leaves of the flower tremble slightly. This quickly aroused her suspicions, and in a moment more the sorceress had decided that the seeming rose was nothing else than a transformation of old Mombi. At the same instant Mombi knew she was discovered and must quickly plan an escape, and as transformations were easy to her, she immediately took the form of a shadow and glided along the wall of the tent toward the entrance, thinking thus to disappear. But Glinda had not only equal cunning, but far more experience than the witch. So the sorceress reached the opening of the tent before the shadow, and with a wave of her hand closed the entrance so securely that Mombi could not find a crack big enough to creep through. The The Scarecrow and his friends were greatly surprised at Glinda's actions, for none of them had noticed the shadow. But the sorceress said to them, "Remain perfectly quiet, all of you, for the witch is even now with us in this tent, and I hope to capture her." These words so alarmed Mombi that she quickly transformed herself from a shadow to a black ant, in which shape she crawled along the ground, seeking a crack or crevice in which to hide her tiny body. Fortunately, the ground where the tent had been pitched, being just before the city gates, was hard and smooth, and while the ant still crawled about, Glenda discovered it and quickly ran forward to effect its capture. But just as her hand was descending, the witch, now fairly frantic with fear, made her last transformation, and in the form of a huge griffin, sprang through the wall of the tent, tearing the silk asunder in her rush, and in a moment had darted away at the speed of a whirlwind. Glenda did not hesitate to follow. She sprang upon the back of the sawhorse and cried, "Now you shall prove that you have the right to be alive. Run, run, run!" The sawhorse ran. Like a flash he followed the griffin, his wooden legs moving so fast that they twinkled like rays of a star. Before our friends could recover from their surprise, both the griffin and the sawhorse had dashed out of sight. "Come, let us follow," cried the Scarecrow. They ran to the place where the Gump was lying and quickly tumbled aboard. "Fly!" commanded Tip eagerly. "Where to?" asked the Gump in its calm voice. "I don't know," returned Tip, who was very nervous at the delay, "but if you will mount into the air, I think we can discover which way Glenda has gone." "Very well," returned the Gump quietly, and it spread its great wings and mounted high into the air. Far away across the meadows, they could now see two tiny specks speeding one after the other, and they knew these specks must be the griffin and the sawhorse. So Tip called the Gump's attention to them, and bade the creature try to take over the witch and sorceress. But swift as was the Gump's flight, the pursued and pursuer moved more swiftly yet, and within a few moments were blotted out against the dim horizon. "Let us continue to follow them, nevertheless," said the Scarecrow, "for the land of Oz is of small extent, and sooner or later they must both come to a halt." Old Mombi had thought herself very wise to choose the form of a griffin, for its legs were exceedingly fleet and its strength more enduring than that of other animals. But she had not reckoned on the untiring energy of the sawhorse, whose wooden limbs could run for days without slacking their speed. Therefore, after an hour's hard running, the griffin's breath began to fail, and it panted and gasped painfully, and moved more slowly than before. Then it reached the edge of the desert and began racing across the deep sands. But its tired feet sank far into the sand, and in a few minutes the griffin fell forward, completely exhausted, and lay still upon the desert waste. Glenda came up a moment later, riding the still vigorous sawhorse, and having unwound a slender golden thread from her girdle, the sorceress threw it over the head of the panting and helpless griffin, and so destroyed the magical power of Mombi's transformation. For the animal, with one fierce shudder, disappeared from view, while in its place was discovered the form of the old witch, glaring savagely at the serene and beautiful face of the sorceress. And that is the end of the chapter and our reading for today. Tomorrow we will read the last 2 chapters of the book. You'll find out what happens to Mombi, if we find Princess Ozma, and if the Scarecrow will get his throne back of the Emerald City. So I hope you will join tomorrow for our last reading of The Land of Oz, and also I'll let you know then what our next book will be. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day.